They mocked the wheelchair Apache girl, until a childless cowboy rolled her toward freedom. Dust devoured the mining town of Long Notch, turning every cough red and every smile brittle. At high noon, the main street paused for its favorite sport, laughing at the girl in the splintered chair. Atsa, called Lark in her own tongue, sat near the assay office, wheels groaning each time she shifted for shade. A rope kept her from drifting. Knot looped the porch rail like a reluctant mule. Boys tossed pebbles at her spokes for points. Women whispered wagers on how long before she was carted to the poorhouse out east. Her back stayed straight, jaws silent, eyes fixed on a hawk riding thermal over slag heaps. Luke Remy watered his tired roan at the trough across the street. Sun bleached a brand on his flank coat. Wind pressed his empty breast pocket flat, where letters of rejection once sat. The doctor's verdict, no children. He watched the pebble crack against Atsa's rim, heard the brittle cheer, and felt something rip the stitching inside his ribs. He crossed the street slow, boots whispering through dust. The boys scattered, half proud, half afraid of the lean man with the iron stare. Close up he saw the wheel hub, spoke snapped, axle bent, and the thick hemp knot that called itself charity. He knelt, cut the rope with his pocket blade, examined the brake. "I can mend this," he said, voice low like creek under ice. She studied him, said nothing, but her left hand twitched once. Permission enough. Luke hauled the chair onto the boardwalk. Inside the livery, he found a half-moon rim, a crate nail, scraps of harness leather. Hammer rang 5 times. Spectators lost interest. Noon heat hunted new amusements. When he rolled the chair back, the wheels whispered smooth, a colt newly shod. Atsa rested her palms on the rims, testing. Luke untied the knot, placed a frayed rope in her lap like a slain snake. She met his gaze, eyes the color of storm-wet cedar. From her throat escaped one word, soft but clear, "Free!" Luke nodded once. Behind them, the tavern owner hollered, "Hey, mule doctor, she still owes board for sitting there." Luke fished a lone coin from his coat, one silver dollar kept for trail salt, and flicked it underhand. It slapped the bar like a tiny gavel. Paid. Shocked laughter followed him as he wheeled Atsa into the furnace light of the street. His wagon waited at town edge, empty of hopes but big on room. He lashed planks into a ramp, guided chair up, brace wheels with feed sacks. Some miners called good riddance. A few women cross hearts. Luke lifted reins, clucked to the roan. Dust swallowed Long Notch behind them, but jeers chased a while before wind erased each syllable. The trail south clawed at wheels, but Luke walked beside, easing jolts. Late day heat softened. Sky bled garnet. He set camp in a dry wash mellowed by sage scent. Fire small, coffee thin. Atsa accepted tin cup without flinch, slid closer to flame. Moon rose like a scarred coin. Luke patched another spoke by sparks, his hand steady for once. She pointed to hills where coyotes threaded shadows, then drew a hawk in air with 2 fingers, sign for freedom. Luke tapped chest, then the chair, then the same sky. Promised he would not cage her. She tugged sleeve, pulled his hand to the wood seat. Gesture said ride too. He laughed. First time since verdict from doctors. Coyote howled. Hawk answer echoed. At dawn, he found her tracing creekstone paths in dust, mapping. She placed stone on rim. East, water. Luke hitched roan, steer that bearing. Wagon lurched, but chair stayed true. They reached his ranch by sundown. 2 leaning sheds, 20 sheep, 1 cedar tree fighting wind. Atsa's gaze swept the emptiness, then returned calm. Blank page beats broken chapter. Luke carried her over threshold. No bridal jest, just boards too narrow for wheels. He laid her on a cot near window, facing dawn. She brushed his cheek with knuckle. First tenderness he'd felt in years. He stepped outside, stared at dry lot shimmering copper, and realized the soil might yet bloom, if watered by fate of 2 hearts once called useless. Inside, Atsa uncoiled the rope Luke had severed. She braided it tight, Luke not into perfect hawk. When he returned, she held it out. Gift. Luke hung it over the door. Wind snuck through cracks, made the rope hawk dance. He whispered, home, Not sure if it was question or answer. She nodded, sleep claiming her as stars birthed overhead. In the hush, Luke knelt, pressed ear to rough plank floor, listened beyond the creaks for the faint sound of wheels ready to sing on open earth rather than circle shame. He heard it, quiet but there. Outside, the hawk of rope kept watch, its shadow merging with first strokes of dawn. Dawn peeled rose skin off the plains. Luke rose first, fed the stove a handful of juniper chips, waited for the kettle's thin whistle. From the cot, Atza watched amber light crawl across the room, stop at the wheels and ask whether they still turned. Luke answered by rolling her outside onto the warped porch. Cool air, sheep bleating, sky too wide for any roof. The ramp was just 2 planks and a prayer. Chair bounced once, held. Luke wheeled her to the lone cedar. She traced bark grooves, fingers reading age rings. He fetched handsaw, cut a single limb, straight, springy, perfect axle wood. She nodded approval. Partnership spoken in timber. Fence posts listed like drunks. Luke righted 3 before breakfast, shoulders trembling. Atza whistled for rising notes. Sheep startled, clustered. Another sequence. They drifted left. He stepped back amazed. She gestured. Your turn. His attempt splintered the air. Hughes ignored him. She laughed, the sound small, unpracticed, but bright as tin. That afternoon, Luke hauled scrap wheels from a busted plow. Sawed cedar limb to fit, hammered iron hoop as tire. Chair became chassis for a 2-wheel pony cart. Atza's sanded edges smooth with shard of sandstone, hands nimble despite scars. By dusk the cart stood ready, shaft size for a half-wild paint mare Luke never managed to break. Atza stroked the mare's muzzle, whispered something older than English. Animal settled. Accepted yoke. Freedom on wheels, pulled by muscle not pity. Luke exhaled thanks he could not phrase. Next morning she loaded Chair onto cart bed, guided Luke through whistle language. 2 short bursts, mare walked. 1 long, halt. They traced fence line, found seep spring choked by tumbleweed. Luke hacked channel, water glistened. Atza dipped fingers, flicked droplets at sun like blessing. Returning, cart hit a spine of shale, lurched. Wheel rim cracked. Luke cursed. She tapped his forearm, pointed to cracked barn door. Salvage. They limped home. Luke reforged rim hotter, stronger. She watched hammer sparks, I reflecting fire. She trusted metal sounds more than townsfolk words. Around cook fire, Luke opened the Bible his wife once held, but he'd feared to touch. Pages smelled of cedar smoke and river dust. He read aloud psalm cadence. Stumbling. Atza closed eyes, hummed harmony under breath. When he faltered, she nudged Page, patient. He finished verse, voice steadier. In trade, she taught him Apache lark calls. High trill meant clear path. Low double chirp meant stranger. They practiced until stars shifted. He whistled lark. She smiled, approval like dawn. 3rd week, clouds boiled bruises across horizon. Wind slapped shutters, flung grit needles. Luke tied barn doors. Atza wheeled a porch edge, scanning sky. First lightning cracked, mare shrieked, bolted, dragging cart. Rope yoke snapped, cart toppled, chair hurled. Luke sprinted, rescued chair before wheels crushed it, but frame split. He slammed fist on dirt, defeat taste metal. Atza gripped his wrist, guided hand to cedar trunk still standing. She tapped, rebuild. Together under rain, she held lantern while he planed new slats. Splinters slicing time until storm passed. By dawn, cart reborn. Stronger joints pegged with sheep-bone dowels. Loss became lesson, carved into grain. With ramp widened, Atza rolled inside barn, asked for music with nod toward fiddle Luke kept dust hung. He hadn't played since burial. String snapped under first tension. She fashioned new one from horsehair and thread. He drew bow. Note wavered then held. She wheeled tight circles, fringe of blanket swirling. A seated dance fierce as any charge. Sheep crowded door, silent audience. Luke played faster, tears mixing rosin. After, breathing hard, he knelt at her chair, forehead to her hand. She lifted his chin, traced smile line never used. Wordless vow, joy aloud. Twilight day 30 brought a lone rider. Jeremiah Quinn, Atza's appointed guardian, eyes slick as axle grease. He dismounted with Ledger claiming reimbursement for care. Luke stood between. Quinn spat at Wheels, called her dead weight. Atsa's face stayed stone, but hand trembled. Luke said 3 words. She's not property. Quinn laughed. Promise returned with law. That night, fear sniffed corners. Luke cleaned his rifle. Only 4 cartridges left. Atsa rolled to him, placed chair brake, patted seat beside. He sat. She plucked hawk knot from doorway, untied old rope, fed strands of fire, burning the tether that once bound her. She braided a new cord from fresh-drawn wool, looped around Luke's wrist, around hers, joined but not tied tight. Meanings clear, stand together. Next morning's filled with drilling. Wren whistle patterns to drive sheep as moving shield. Luke built pivot mount on chair armrest, Winchester swivels with leather strap, so recoil won't jerk wheels. Elsie's phantom laughter may be echoed from clouds. Luke felt her approval in sun warmth on scar. Atsa practiced loading shell single-handed, muscle memory carving grooves. Luke watched awe. She missed Tenkin twice, then drilled center 5 times in row. Wind carried ring like church bell forgiving. Campfire again, quiet. Luke traced callous thumb over new cord linking their wrists. World still cruel, he whispered. Atsa tapped his chest and hers, shaped 2 raised fingers, intertwining, stronger. Overhead Orion climbed. Coyotes cried safe hunt. Luke answered with clumsy whistle. She corrected pitch, laughter flutter soft. In distance, a dust line hinted Quinn gathering greed. But between horizon and porch stood ramp cart, spring water and 2 hearts, one beating on wheels, one mending behind rib scars, ready. They rose ahead of dawn, 2 silhouettes at the edge of rye, listening to distant hoofbeats that inside the wind way a rattler hides inside dust. Luke saddled the paint mare, strapped the swivel gun to Atsa's chair, then followed her whistle signals along the fence line. She tested every latch, every hinge, memorizing the yard like a seam chart. He counted cartridges, felt the lightness of 4, but carried them as if they weighed 1,000. Near noon the ridge line quivered. Quinn and 3 hired hands, coats the color of old blood, rifles across pommels. Their shadows stretched before them, thin spears thrown farther than any bullet. Luke wheeled Atsa onto the porch and stood beside her, the rope brace circling both their wrists. Quinn tugged reins 10 paces out, grinned with teeth he hadn't earned. He held a paper with notary flourish. Guardianship purchased from a judge 2 counties away. Law's the law, he said, voice greased with certainty. Luke kept rifle low, finger resting on brass. Atsa lifted the chair brake with a small click that sounded louder than thunder. Quinn dismounted, boots sinking ankle-deep in dust. He waved men forward. Luke fired once, over their heads, warning enough to peel a scream from one horse and scattered into mesquite. Atsa spun chair, front casters kissing plank seams. Her left hand kept will steady. Right found lever strap, pulled, and the Winchester rose as though it remembered another lifetime in cavalry hands. She squeezed. One rider toppled, hat spinning. Second man ducked behind trough. Water burst across yard, glittering like shattered glass. Quinn cursed, rushed porch, snatched Luke's rifle barrel with bare palm, burned skin hissing like meat on iron. Luke drove shoulder into his gut. They crashed through gate, splinters raining. Atsa reversed, wheels squealing, line sights. Luke pinned Quinn's arm so the shot could take flesh not friend. She fired. Quinn's sleeve exploded red. Knife fell, thumped plank. He reeled, stumbled against cart shaft. Last rider raised shotgun. Atsa could not pivot fast. Luke shoved Quinn into barrels, dove toward chair, arms wide. Shot roared, toward top rail porch, peppered Luke's back with splinters but missed life. Atsa yanked whistle between teeth, blue trill that cracked sky. The paint mare, tied loose behind barn, charged, hooves drumming fury. Horse struck gunman side on, dropped him with breathless grunt. Silence pooled thick, broken only by Quinn's ragged moan. He crawled toward paper fluttering in dust. Atsa rolled forward, crushed deed under wheel, grinding ink into soil. Luke pulled rope cord from wrist, bound Quinn's hands, dragged lead in the fence post, tied hard with Gideon, not Atsa, showed him last week. Deputy had been invited that morning by telegram. Law would arrive, slow but sure. Luke collapsed on porch step, breast shredded. Atsa wheeled close, touched splinter cuts. He caught her hand. I thought losing blood would feel cold. He managed, but I'm warm. She press-palmed his heart, felt rhythm alive. He whispered, I love you, Lark. First time he dared give the feeling sound. She brushed fingers across his lips, shaped the same words in English she'd practiced at night while he slept. I love you, Luke River. She had named him after the water he had dug for her. That evening the deputy hauled Quinn and men away. Luke signed statement with hand that would not stop shaking until Atsa placed hers atop it. Neighbors rode in, fixed gate, patched plank, spoke praise they once withheld. Someone left a sack of seed beside porch without name. Another left jar of honey. Stars came out clean. Luke sat on ramp's edge. Atsa wheeled beside him. She untied the wool rope from his wrist, retied it with a new knot looser, leaving room for a tiny carved hawk she'd whittled after storm night. He lifted her hand, kissed scar where ropes once burned. Above, a hawk soared circles the size of new destinies. Below, two hearts rested in the hush between coyotes and sunrise, already planning tomorrow's fence, tomorrow's quilt, tomorrow's child carried first and hope before arms. Wind crept soft through rye, carrying away the last echo of laughter that had mocked wheels, leaving only the hush of respect. Atsa turned chair toward cabin. Luke walked beside, steps matching wheel turns. Inside, fiddle waited, hawk not danced, and a world once measured by coins now measured by shared breath and open doors. They found the boy the week frost silvered the rye, a half-sleeping bundle beside the drift fence, a pale-eyed child of maybe 7, skin coffee cream, moccasins too small for winter. He had no words, only a string of rawhide hung with a tin soldier. Luke lifted him into the cart. Atsa wrapped him in her blanket, felt bones like bird quills beneath rag shirt. At the cabin, she ladled thin honey into hot milk. The boy drank without blinking and slept 20 hours. When he woke, Luke offered paper and pencil. The child drew a single line down the page in a circle at the end. River meeting sun. Atsa tapped her chest. Soleil? He nodded. The name stayed. Winter laid logs on the roof. Luke stretched canvas over the cart, patted it with wool. It became mobile hearth. Atsa taught Soleil whistles for left, right, stop. Soon he guided the mare as if born to reins. Luke saw footsteps widen behind that cart, 2 thin tracks, and 1 wheel groove carving snow. He swore to keep them unbroken. Nights. Fiddle voices mingled with Atsa's low lark hum. Luke read psalms aloud. Soleil traced letters into fireplace ash, copying river curves. 1 verse ended. Luke's voice cracked. Atsa covered his hand with hers, steadying scripture and heart in one touch. Cold scratch windows, but inside cedar knots hissed heat and hope. When creek ice cracked to announce spring, Luke planted beans where rye stood, sowed sunflowers along fence for the bees. He built a lever press on the cart axle. Atsa could lift sacks now without leaving seat. Soleil gathered arrow straight reeds. They wove a wider ramp so neighbors could roll feed to the sheep pen. Laughter returned as regular as chores. On a breath-warm dust the deputy clattered up with documents. Guardianship void. Quinn sentenced transport east, and an adoption form for the boy if you wish. Luke signed beside Atsa's mark of a wheeling hawk. Soleil pressed muddy thumbprint between. Family recorded. Summer brought orchard fragrance. The peach pit Luke had pocketed months ago sprouted behind cedar. Atsa sketched little rails that guided chair between rows, wheels brushing pedals instead of stones. Luke dug post holes, mindful of her instructions. She sanded each slat, the boys staining them with berry juice, red palms glowing like dawn prints. They built a low stage of barn planks. Soleil wanted music for harvest. Luke tuned fiddle. Atsa threaded bells to spokes, tied ribbons to arms. When sun slipped behind amber hills, neighbors filed in, Ada with bread, the Kiowa brothers with drums, old Miss Corbin bringing a jar of blue glass tears she called moonshine. Lanterns flickered like captive stars. Luke drew bow across strings, first slow waltz. Atsa wheeled forward, ribbons fluttering. She hooked one rope to Luke's belt, another to Soleil's wrist. When she spun, they followed, a triangle turning under lamps, the chair becoming compass rose that drew new paths across porch boards. Laughter watchers folded into song. Some wept quietly, seeing courage dance. Midnight cooled the dust. Embers pulsed red coins. Luke carried Atsa past threshold widened earlier that day. Soleil stepped behind them, hawk knot in hand, hooking it over door once the rope protector frayed. Inside, cradle waited, cedar carved, each rail etched with circle and river line. Soleil's first drawing, now forever wood. They lay awake listening to sheep sigh, wind stroke ramp, owl mark hour. Luke whispered, "Nothing missing now." Atsa answered with a breath that tasted of cedar and moonlight, then said aloud, clear, proud, "Home." Soleil echoed from the pallet, half dreaming, "Home." In the morning, hoofbeats drummed across valley, mustangs running free, dust rising like prayer smoke. Luke, Atsa, Soleil watched them crest a ridge, manies of flaming sunrise. Hoof prints and wheel tracks tangled in meadow. Impossible to tell which led first, which followed. Only that all of them pointed forward, toward the bright cut of future, where roads are written by the ones who dare remake their names. 19 summer moons later, the rye stalks whisper higher than a boy's shoulders, and Soleil, now all elbows and quick laughter, rode to paint mare ahead of dawn, set siphon pipes along the creek. Drought had bitten the valley for weeks. Each mouthful of water counted. Atsa rolled behind him, a leather ledger on her lap, noting flow, mapping how many heartbeats the channel took to refill the trough. Luke followed with a spade and the limp that came after he mistimed a bronc in spring. Pain slowed his stride, but not his resolve. By noon the wind tasted metallic, and clouds piled west, bruised and heavy. They needed the rain, yet rain arriving after parched ground meant flash flood. Rye could drown in minutes. Luke hammered ditch breaks. Soleil drove stakes. Atsa tapped her whistle code. Sharp high, then long low, barking orders that cut through wind the way gulls cut surf. Neighbors glanced from far fields, half amused to see a youth, a woman on wheels, and a slow-bending man command the land like generals. Thunder cracked, spilling bright edges over the ridge. Soleil shouted that the northern fence was still open. Luke started that direction, but Atsa flicked reins on the cart mule, overtook him, wheels throwing dust. She reached the breach first, lashed gate wire with rawhide, then braced chair against post as rain sheeted sideways. Luke arrived to find her soaked, hair plastered, grin fierce. Together they watched the water surge, but stay inside ditches they had cut in gentler days. Storm passed by evening, leaving the ride glistening instead of flattened. They walked the field's edge, Luke with lantern, Atsa turning rims through soft mud, Soleil splashing beside like an otter. Fireflies lit the first safe night after thirst. The boy caught one in cupped hands, offered a trembling glow to his mothers and father. Luke laughed and lifted him onto shoulders. Atsa steered close, resting a hand on Luke's back, all balance found in that simple triangle. Later inside, peachwood coals smoothed chill from the air. Soleil fell asleep against a new cradle. Empty still, yet not for long. Atsa's belly rounded beneath quilt layers, child moving like quiet drums. Luke knelt, pressed ear, marveling at second chance the doctors swore impossible. Atsa threaded fingers through his beard, whispered, "Life grows where room is made." He answered by unrolling a tattered map, the rail spur now creeping toward their county. Freight would need sheep hides, rye grain, cured peaches. They could sign contracts, build a second ramp at the depot, stretch influence farther than the creek's bend. Atsa traced a black ink line, then drew an extension with charcoal. The road Soleil might ride one day, wheels or hooves or steam beneath him. Luke kissed the mark, sealing dream to paper. At dawn they hung a new board above the porch, hawk and lark trading painted in Soleil's careful hand. Sheep grazed beyond, orchard shimmered in a cart, once a patchwork of scavenged parts. Stood varnished and sturdy, its wheels reflecting sunrise like twin coins. When the first buyers came weeks later, they hesitated at the sight, a woman turning chair with effortless grace, a youth speaking whistle and English, a man steady himself on a carved cedar staff. Atsa offered handshake. Luke the contract. Soleil loaded grain. Deal signed without discount or pity. Respect set the price. That night, candles ringed the unfinished nursery. Luke sanded cradle rails. Soleil painted little river stones and lined them along windowsill. Atsa sang in her lark-bright tongue, welcoming the child who would never know the taste of mockery, only the fullness of ground tilled by perseverance and spun smooth by wheels. Outside, wind carried the rattled laugh of the creek, no longer a threat, but a partner. Coyotes signed safe passage, and a hawk glided low, shadows stitching over the rye. Proof that sky, like land, could grow wider when shared. The lamp burned low. Luke closed ledger. Atsa leaned against him. Soleil curled near the hearth, and the house breathed as one body. Roof words from years back still true on crossbeam. Home is built of hands that refuse to let go.